Good evening, everyone, and happy King Day. Happy King Day to you, Sister Khara.
Happy King Day.
Today has been quite the day. I think this is my third or fourth King Day program, but it's truly been an exciting day. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, welcome. For our regulars, for our supporters, welcome and thank you. This is the Lived Black Experience Project, where we come every week or every other week, and sometimes in between on the weekends with a hot topic. This month we are celebrating Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Today, of course, is King Day. And we started off on Wednesday celebrating Dr. King with a discussion of his I Have a Dream speech. This evening is very exciting. Our presenter, who is a regular, I call him my Baba, my brother and Baba, Professor Greg McAllister. He's going to come with an examination of Dr. King's Riverside Church speech, which was given exactly 1 year to the date, April 4th, 1967, 1 year to the date of his assassination, April 4th, 1968. But a few people that I know who witnessed that speech in person speak about how he rode uptown to Riverside Church on the Upper West Side, for those of you who are familiar with New York. And the speech was originally entitled Beyond Vietnam, a Time to Break Silence, but we know it today as the Riverside Church speech, where it really was an anti-Vietnam War speech and a pro-social justice speech. And it really was quite the turn from other King speeches. So I'm very excited to welcome my Baba, my brother, this evening. Sister Khara, will you introduce our special guest presenter?
Absolutely. I am honored to introduce our speaker tonight, who is Professor Greg McAllister. Professor McAllister is a lecturer with a master's degree in history and a graduate certificate in ethnic studies from NAU. His research focuses on the history of African Americans in the Southwest, the formation of race in the United States, and African interaction with indigenous peoples and Latinos in North America. Mr. McAllister brings a varied background as an historian, a percussionist, and as an artist.
Baba, welcome.
Welcome. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited about this. And as was said, that my background is history, and I've looked at interaction between African Americans and indigenous people in the Southwest borderlands through teaching in the ethnic studies program. I've focused much more on just Black studies in general. And also over the years, I have struggled with the Martin Luther King Day celebration. Now, this is kind of a confession here, even though in my faith we don't confess. But I used to go to, these events, but always with the feeling that, Martin Luther King is not relevant. Yes, I should be thankful for the holiday, and the fact that I'm able to get a degree and interact in the society has a lot to do with the successes of the civil rights movement. But in the 21st century, it didn't seem like it was still at the forefront. That King wasn't necessarily at the forefront. But that's because I had certain ideas about Martin Luther King. And I think I want to say more about that, but actually what I like to practice in the classroom is really find out what you all think. So I have some questions here in the chat. Okay. What comes to mind when someone says Dr. Martin Luther King? What's the first thing? Let's just go with your first thoughts, first impressions. If you want to do it in one word or a short sentence or 3 words, just go ahead and write in whatever comes to mind. You shouldn't spend a whole lot of time thinking. Just think about the first mental impression, first images, first words. If you could go ahead and put that in the chat.
For anybody who's viewing with us, you can put that into the chat on Facebook and we will be able to read that out.
Okay. So we can include, my 2 sisters here. What do you think? Put your thoughts in there.
So we have folks saying freedom. Someone said, I have a dream.
Okay.
For myself, my mind goes to Coretta Scott King and just ideas of family and faithfulness and legacy, I think is a big one for me.
Okay, legacy. Very good. Okay.
We have someone said assassinated. Another said nonviolence.
Okay, very good. Okay. Bernadine, did you say something?
I was saying, I think of compassion.
Okay. Okay. So back to my confession that, yeah, for me, it was I have a dream, right? The civil rights movement, protests, water hose, dogs attacking children. So all of that is part of that what was in my mind. And, in other words, that's all I thought about in terms of Martin Luther King. And I think within the last 4 or 5 years, I've become familiar more with the Martin Luther King of 1968, who's a different individual. I would say that he evolved. That's one way we can think about this. But I think we have to be careful about individuals, right? Because we are all complex human beings. There are those that will say, yes, King was radical the last year of his life, and that's the real King, right? I'm not going to say that because I don't know what he would do if he were living now. We can't make that kind of prediction with individuals, right? There's so many things that can happen in our lives that can make us change, right? But I think it's important to think about the last year of his life as a witness to the importance of King in the 21st century. So I think this is a great time to start the PowerPoint here. Okay, so I call this Grappling with King, Grappling with MLK of 1968 in the 21st century. So go ahead and move on to the next. Okay, so here, this is actually from an article from Time magazine. And it says, most Americans remember Martin Luther King Jr. for his dream of what this country could be. A nation where his children would, quote, not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. While these words from 1963 were necessary, his speech Beyond Vietnam from 1967 is actually a much more insightful one. It is also much more dangerous and disturbing speech, which is why far fewer Americans have heard of it. And yet it is a speech that we needed to hear then and need to hear today. And by the way, you can always do a search online for this Riverside speech or Beyond Vietnam, and it's digitized. It's 1 hour and 55 minutes. So it's a great way to spend your time in terms of meditating on King's legacy. Okay, next, please. Okay. So I'm going to be exploring a number of quotes from this speech. Let me put my glasses on here. So here he's talking about the war in Vietnam, but it's within a broader context. Now, I think one of the things, one of the other words that we think about when Martin Luther King's name is mentioned is civil rights leader. He's much more than that. I would say that King was also an internationalist, that he had this international perspective in terms of, what it means to be Black, what it means to be a citizen, not only of the United States, but of the planet in general. So here he says, I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, now here he's talking about post-World War II revolts, revolutions that were taking place in Southeast Asia, in Africa, and throughout the world. So this is the context. We as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. Now, what he means by radical goes to the root word of going to the root, to be redundant. It means going to the root of a problem, not to solve things in a superficial way, but really to get down to the base of the issue. Okay. A radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. So very important, making that shift. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. Now, in meditating on the works of King during his last year, he would sometimes use terms interchangeably. And actually, in this quote here, he defines a thing-oriented society. So here he's talking about machines, computers, and profit motives being more important than people. So this was one of his definitions of what constituted materialism. He would often say, often talk about the thingification of the Negro, treating Black people like things. That's part of that materialism. Okay, a true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. Okay, so here he's talking about three evils. Now I want to get into the dangerous aspects of this speech. So here, this is a quote from James Cone, and this is a book called Martin and Malcolm and America, A Dream or a Nightmare. So here he says, King's great Beyond Vietnam speech given at the Riverside Church in New York exactly 1 year before his assassination was heard around the world. In terms of moral courage, it was his greatest hour as he proclaimed America to be the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. Now, I have to be honest with you. We are not celebrating Martin Luther King's birthday because of this quote, right? It's the I have a dream quote, okay? That's why we have the holiday, based on that 1963 speech, okay? Because after he made this speech, the feelings about Martin Luther King around the country, in terms of his his eminence, began to crash. Okay, he had an approval rate. A third of the white population approved of him after that. Okay, and maybe 50% of African Americans approved of him. So really, his celebrity was in decline. during this period. Okay, can we go to the next? Uh-oh. Okay. Now it's important, so you have that quote, that the United States is the greatest purveyor of violence, right? Very strong words. But I think it's important that we look at the context, because we often imagine King as being kind of a Santa Claus, a black Santa Claus, a non-threatening Negro, right? He's not like that bad Negro, Malcolm X, right? And the reason why we love King, right, is because he believed in nonviolence. Well, King was very consistent in terms of his feeling about violence in general. And I think this is the context in which we need to look at what he says about the United States, okay? So part of this speech here, King is talking about his interaction with the youth in the urban north, in places like Chicago, places like Watts, who were in rebellion, right, who believed in violence or self-defense, right, the Second Amendment, that whole principle of your right to protect yourself. So this is where, I think I'm going to go on a rant here. I think this is where, America has a unstable, I need to use a psychological word for it, just this unstable feeling about violence, okay? So it's okay for Black people to be nonviolent, okay? But it's okay for it's not okay for Black people to be violent. But it is not okay for the state to be nonviolent. And so this is where King is being very consistent about this, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and go into the quote and elaborate more here. So I have tried to offer my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. Okay. But they asked, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? And you're bringing it into the present. Well, what about Iraq? What about Afghanistan? They asked if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about change it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without first having spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, and for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent. So really, this represents moral consistency. Now, I think this is relevant, and this is where we need to open it up into conversation in a little bit here. I'm almost done with the quotes. I think it's important to see the relevance of King's critique of U.S. militarism, and that these issues still persist, right? We have over 800 bases around the planet, right? We are in constant war, whether we're talking about the war on terror, the war on drugs. Okay. Now, I picked this quote from the speech in that I feel like it's relevant to our situation with the COVID virus and there being no resources. Unlike even some of the so-called underdeveloped countries like Ghana, they have been able to pay people to stay home, or are they allowed to have more universal health care? Now, I'm being very general here, but I think most of us know that there's been a failure, right, with the wealthiest country on the planet, wealthiest empire in history, to not take care of its people. So here again, King relates that materialism, right, to war as well. So here, America would never invest necessary funds or energies in the rehabilitation of its poor, so long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw men and skills and money like a demonic, destructive suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see that war as an enemy of the poor and to attack it as such. So that's another element. Also, I think that persists now in the 21st century is our unwillingness to learn from other countries. So here he's saying Western arrogance, the Western arrogance of feeling that it has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them is not just. Okay, you can move on to the next one. Okay, so this is from an essay that King had written, but it was published after his death. And this is where I really want to come together with all the evils that King talked about. He said there were 4 evils, and I'm going to go ahead and just read it right here. And, you know, what's amazing about this particular piece is that it's written as if it was written yesterday. Millions of Americans are coming to see that we are fighting an immoral war that costs nearly $30 billion a year, that we are perpetuating racism, that we are tolerating almost 40 million poor during an overflowing material abundance. Yet they, or I should say we, remain helpless to end the war, to feed the hungry, to make brotherhood a reality. This has to shake our faith in ourselves. If we look honestly at the realities of our national life, boy, that's true. It is clear that we are not marching forward. We are groping and stumbling. We are divided and confused. Our moral values and our spiritual confidence sink even as our material wealth ascends. In these trying circumstances, the Black Revolution is much more than the struggle for the rights of Negroes. I'm going to read that again, because a lot of times we just think this is all just only about Black people. The Black Revolution is much more than the struggle for the rights of Negroes. It is forcing America to face all its interrelated flaws. So these are interrelated. Racism, poverty, militarism, and materialism. Now in my ES courses, like in the Introduction to Ethnic Studies, I actually have my students read a textbook. It's called The Indigenous Peoples History of the United States. And what I try to do is I try to have my students analyze that history of settler colonialism by looking at how those 4 evils function, how the racism functions, and how the economic exploitation functions, and how the materialism functions, you know, the taking of land, and militarism, right? So these are all interconnected. King would often use poverty and economic exploitation interchangeably. Okay. Again, so it is exposing evils that are rooted deeply in the whole structure of our society. It reveals systemic rather than superficial flaws and suggests radical reconstruction of society itself to be the real issue to be faced. Now, you know, you can interpret this, okay, he's just saying, you know, we just need to change our entire political system. But going back to that first quote from the speech, Riverside speech, he said that the revolution of values, he talks about revolution of values, which suggests that the consciousness of the society needs to change. Okay, that the society itself cannot change without the change of consciousness, without knowledge. And so I think that's very important. And also, we have to understand that, Martin Luther King is a revolutionary Christian, and in a sense, he is talking about saving the soul of America, but he's also talking about there being a transformation, a kind of resurrection of something that is dead, right? If you're thinking about the morality, right, the materialism, that's something that, that the change has to be deep. It can't just be the changing of laws or even changing the complexion of the person that's going to be, the head of the state, or even having an entire, black Congress. That's not going to change the society, according to King, right? That the change has to come in a very deep and profound way. Okay, next. Okay, so here's the way I look at it. They did these four evils. So we have racism, or what I call white supremacy, economic exploitation. A lot of times we think about racial prejudice as just being something that exists by itself. King actually talked about racial injustice and injustice as a twin to economic exploitation, that economic injustice, that those things are always together, okay? And then the militarism is, again, all these wars that we're involved in, but also within our own nation, you also have like a police state, right? That you have the similar issues, right, of militarization of our society. And then again, materialism is the thing-oriented society. Okay, next. Okay, so Martin Luther King, one of his allies was a Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. He was actually there at the Riverside speech. He was at his side throughout the struggle, even though he was no longer popular, no longer a friend to the President of the United States. I mean, the President of the United States referred to him, with the N-word. I mean, that's how mad Johnson was with Martin Luther King. And even the NAACP turned on King once he started speaking against the war in Vietnam. But this is what Rabbi Heschel said to a meeting of rabbis. He said, Martin Luther King Jr. is a voice, a vision, and a way. The whole future of America will depend on the impact and influence of Dr. King. So I think I want to end this part with that quote and then also give you some suggested readings. There's a book called The Radical King. This is edited by Cornel West. I highly recommend it. And then Vincent Harding's book, Martin Luther King, An Inconvenient Hero. Third, James Cone's book, very good, conversation about Martin in reference to Malcolm X, looking at the United States within that context of those their approaches. Also, if you're interested in kind of this historical tradition of struggle, you have Cornel West's book called The Black Prophetic Fire, and that's a conversation with Cornel West. And then last but not least, The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. Even though it seems like, Indigenous history is not related to Black history, I see them interconnected. The part of the racial project that defined whiteness, that defined Blackness, or what it means to be an American Indian in this country. The first racial project was the taking of indigenous land. And again, that's linked with militarism, right? You don't just take land from human beings without dehumanizing. So therefore, you need the racism to do that. The materialism is all the wealth created by land, okay? And then looking at what happened with Africans, you know, being captives here, working, again, economic exploitation. You needed white supremacy, racism to justify that oppression, but all connected with the creation of wealth, right? That the creation of wealth, you cannot detach it from that. Okay, so I think I'm ready for some conversation.
Right. Thank you for that presentation and for those quotes and that insight. I know you have some discussion questions that you want to get into. I did have a question from an audience member as well,
Okay.
that I think will lead into some of what we're going to discuss, which was simply asking, we are clear about Dr. King's thoughts, but did he leave us some directions on how to overcome the issues that face us all?
Very good. Okay, now I can see you. Okay. You know, I was thinking about that today. I think there are some references to socialism, but I think that he was indirect about that. Yeah, I mean, that's a hard question to answer, because I think during the last years of his life, he was primarily focused on struggle with the power structure. So through protests, he was concerned about workers, which is relevant even now, right? But I felt like he gave us some direction, and I think the movements that followed him came up with certain solutions. So, like, if you even think about the Black Panther Party, you know, they opened up free clinics. They took on different projects, whether, you know, working with the political system of running for office. And again, all of these are different solutions.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if he wasn't in some ways intentionally vague in offering solutions, because it wasn't just a one person can fix this situation, if that makes sense. Just that idea that, you know, this is an American problem and all of America needs to be involved in coming up with solutions. And so I wonder how much he was maybe felt a sense of trepidation or hesitancy to keep offering, this is what we need to do, or this is the solution, when it was also so easy for people to say, well, this is then the solution, we're not going to try anything else. Or if that solution fails, then this person led us all astray and it's their fault. That idea of accepting the full weight of all of this.
Yeah, I think we need to think about what he did. So, you know, you had all these different forces, right, in the Black community. So you had people on the ground, and you had people like Ella Baker, who, you know, worked with the communities where people they had the solution to the problem. Actually, that's Ella Baker. That, you know, it's not people like King at the top, but the people on the ground have the solution, because they know their problems. They are the closest to their problems, right? But then also you had the whole strategy of working with the courts. You also had the strategy of really putting pressure on the government, United States government. And in that speech, if you look at that speech, And to be honest, he didn't write the entire speech by himself. He worked with people that knew what was happening on the ground. And so there's suggestions and steps that he gives to ending the conflict in Vietnam. And actually, you know, that's something to consider. So what were because he's not vague with that particular issue. And then the other solution is also taking the resources away from militarism so that there's actually resources to help the community. So even think about now, look at all the resources that are in military and bases. I mean, and think about the resources we have for keeping people healthy and people alive in this country.
Yeah, and that was actually a comment that one of the attendees made earlier, which is on the screen now. That was just think of what we could do with the money we spend on military bases and troops all over the world and use those funds to bring people out of poverty. I was watching earlier today an interview with Dr. King where he was talking about I believe the question was just the question of why has America struggled with the so-called Negro problem for so long? And part of his answer was saying that, you know, you have a nation that thinks that the problem was solved because there was the Emancipation Proclamation and that was it. But when you look at the economic side of it, and he addressed the phrase of people being told to pull themselves up from by their bootstraps. And he says that there's a bit of irony and missing the point when you tell people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but you don't recognize the fact that you've left these millions of people bootless. So how can they pull themselves up when they've been put into these economic systems of never having an economic base? So I think that it's very much connected across all of these different social issues, and he definitely talks about that a lot. Ms. Bernadine.
I just wanted to jump in. I think that's probably one of my favorite quotes of Dr. King's would be when he speaks about this, what we refer to as the sacred obligation, when he mentioned that America had given Negro people a bad check, and that the check had come back or marked insufficient funds. And so when we talk about Black economics and when we talk about how, and he talked about it, how it's not that simple for Black people to be able to pull themselves up by the bootstrap when they had no monetary power. And so this was the check that he went to DC with and held up and said, you know, we're here to collect. And you know, we're still here today, still trying to collect on that check because we have not received full payment. And I know many people may say, well, you know, you got to go to school. There are many of you who have education and you know, you're living, you know, you got a roof over your head, you know, maybe even have a nice car. And, you know, that is just America's basics. You know, but to have monetary power means would mean for us as a people, and I invite anyone to join in or share comments, you know, would allow us a real seat at the table, especially when it comes to who our leaders, who our national leaders are, who our local leaders are, our state leaders. We need money. Political power is it comes along with money, and so I think that also was what Dr. King was speaking of.
Yeah, I struggle with that. So there's that whole idea, right, of what we need to do, right, as a colonized people, right, as Black people here. But there's also the idea of the beloved community, right, that was talked about this morning, right? And so what does that look like? Or how do you all imagine that? Okay, because one of the solutions that he came up with, is based on spirituality, right? Of common humanity, but also justice, and really international justice, not just justice here in the United States, but globally, right? Yeah, I mean, so where do we struggle in this? Or how do we struggle in this? Because, he's talking about fundamental change, right? Because a Black president is not going to do it. Black Congress is not going to do it. Because we will still be plundering the rest of the world, I was telling my students, this cell phone here, this is like Congo. This is the Congo here. All the resources of Africa, all the resources of the global South are in this phone.
Yeah.
So even though I have a job, I'm not, no one's calling me the N-word, I'm getting respected, but, the exploitation continues.
This is why we have this lived Black experience project, right? Our goal, our aim is to educate, inform, and enlighten. So, we have this question here, like, what are some strategies for economic justice today? And I mean, I've said it more than once on this broadcast. We're not looking for allies. We're over the need for allies. We need accomplices. And accomplices look like individuals just like the three of us, May would give to the United Negro College Fund. I still support my HBCU alma maters, Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina, Savannah State University in Savannah, Georgia. And I need my European American brothers and sisters. I need for us to sit around a cup of coffee and talk about historically Black colleges and universities and why it is important to give so that they can survive, and why it is important for them to survive as learning institutions that educate and enlighten the Black mind, but also at the same time welcome European American students. So, and I need to hear European American parents sending their children and finding out that a HBCU is just as good of a school as Northern Arizona University. So that's the start. Pouring in, acknowledging that Black businesses are just as good as, we have Mayor Coral, Honorable Coral Evans, with her Destiny's Creations, creating body products. Well, you can go there before you go to Bath and Body Works. We have Miss Deb, our chiefess, our community chiefess, an accomplished seamstress. So you don't have to go to Dillard's to buy that new dress. We have someone who can make you a beautiful dress. So, these are just basic steps to economic justice, supporting Black businesses. I mean, I've made it my goal this year. How many Black businesses can I support? I'm making it a goal, but it's something that I've always done. Any items that I need, I'm going to look for a Black business first before I go to what we know, Macy's and Dillard's and Marshall's and places like that. And so that is where we start, by putting money into our communities, giving to the Murdoch Community Center.
Well, and I think part of what makes so much of what Dr. King said and so much of what his ideas were so at the same time radical and revolutionary and in many ways frightening to a broader American populace is, I mean, I noted in one of the quotes that you shared in your presentation earlier, that statement that the issue of Black civil rights is not just for Black people, but it's for all people. And that idea that economic justice is not just asking for you to put money into the pockets of other people, but to recognize that it's all of us. If any of us is poor or struggling or suffering, then we all are. And that idea of unifying in such a way that is not just filling my own pocket with as much as I can get is terrifying, I think, to so much of America, where we have been taught that the American dream is independent, that the American dream is me accumulating wealth and me having that house and a family and a white picket fence and me being able to have these things. And so we have this idea that my individual accomplishment is worth more than the collective suffering that's going on around me. I think that so much of to have so much of that vision of a unified people missing in our society, and for us to have forgotten so much that the inalienable rights of our Constitution had nothing to do with money. It was the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the fact that those things are denied to so many people because we started focusing so much more on individual economic wealth and those sorts of things. It's terrifying, I think, to people to think that the revolutionary change that we're asking for is fixing those fundamental flaws in the way that we have lived for hundreds of years.
Yeah, for me, it's really about feeling discomfort. And like even in this room where I'm sitting here in northern Arizona, I don't think I can look at anything that is not from somewhere else. And, that just blows my mind, because you think about people trying to get into this country, or even Africans going into Europe, right? There's a whole issue. Well, the Africans are invading. Well, the first hominids and first Homo sapiens sapiens were Africans. But that aside, all the resources taken out of Africa are in Europe. They're here in North America. Central America is here. Haiti is in the house. I mean, all the stuff, all the things that we buy are from somewhere else. Yes, assembled in China, but the resources come out of the ground of the global South. So I'm not comfortable with that. So even the idea of being independent, what does that really mean? Self-sufficient.
But don't you think, as a Black man, and Sister Khara and I here as Black women, have we really been given fair access to that? Sister Khara just reminded us of our Constitution and our unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we cannot ignore that same document says that we are 3/4 human. And so that was not written to us, for us, or by us.
Right.
So.
And that still persists, right? With,
Yeah.
these counties, primarily white counties with the prisons, the representatives of those counties, they count their prisoners as people that they are supposed to represent.
Yeah.
And it's yeah. But yes, there's contradiction, right? There's contradiction, which is part of what we are, right? We are contradictions, right? We are citizens and outsiders. We are members of society, but we are also colonized, right? But that's yeah. But go ahead.
I was gonna say, I guess Dr. King, laid maybe some, like you said, solutions. And then it was for us. I always sometimes go back and reflect on his life work, and he was that voice crying in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is up to us.
Yeah.
It really is up to us.
And that was a comment that one of the viewers made as well. They said, so would it be fair to say that Dr. King started the conversation, and it's been up to us ever since to continue the conversation with action that benefits everyone?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that, he's in dialogue with Malcolm, even though Malcolm was no longer alive, right, during the last year of his life. And he's in dialogue with, the Black Panther Party. So you have all these people based on the ground, based on where they are coming up with solutions and approaches, not necessarily disagreeing with each other. But I think it's important to keep the conversation open. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the other comments that someone made was that love really is the universal answer, but we really don't want to hear that, which I think is so true. And it's something that Dr. King also spoke a lot about, the idea of choosing love over hate, and the fact that love was the basis of so much of what he wanted to see happen within our country. And I think it's so much still part of that question of how do we do this in a way that is benefiting everyone? Can we truly love each other if we're so bent on accumulating for ourselves? Isn't love caring more for the other person than I care for myself, or at least caring as much about the other person as I do about myself?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I don't totally agree with King on this, but he has this whole thing about love, and he says you can love someone, but you don't have to like them.
With that, I get that. Also with love, you can tell someone about themselves, call out their wrongs, and we do it because we love and care for the person. So, I think we still do not understand what love really is. When we look to the Christian scriptures, what is it? Psalm 23, we talk about the rod and the staff. Well, that rod and staff gently guides the sheep, but also if you get out of hand, that rod comes and puts you back into place, right? Keeps you in order. So there's that balance. Love is just, I love you, I love you, I love you, and just give you everything that you want whenever you want it. It's love that causes me to be able to say, look, brother, look, sister, you are out of order. You said or you did something that was not right, and you should not have done that. That is what love does, and I think that was the foundation of Dr. King's work and legacy. And I think we all can agree. We have this love-hate relationship with this place that we call America. Um, we as Black people are not always treated so kindly, but yet every day, here we are, we showed up this evening. And it was love that caused us to come and celebrate Dr. King today, and it's love also that causes us to work with our European American colleagues every day, and we're hurting, because we still carry the hurt, the wounds of slavery. We still carry that. It is in our DNA, but yet, we have significant others, we have lovers, friends, extended family, and that's what love does. That is love in action. That when you can look beyond and you're not pointing fingers, we're not coming in hate. We're not saying we hate European Americans. We're here trying to make this thing right, trying to get it right.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that stands out to me so much with what Dr. King said, and one of the things that I think, again, we are still very much afraid to deal with is that idea of having to fundamentally change the way that we see things and the way that we understand our country and understand what is right, understand what love is, and all of these different things. It's this idea of having to fundamentally look at systemic issues and recognize that these are systems that we have based so much that is uprooted from those ideas on. And if those things are fundamentally wrong, if the root system is wrong, that idea of having to root it out and undo these things that we've been used to for so long. And again, I think I keep going back to that idea of, I just have to say, I feel like there's nothing like the Black idea of unity and community development and all of these different things. This idea that we're not just doing this for ourselves, we're doing it for everyone. And I feel like when you look at historical Black institutions and historical Black schools and all of those things, when you look at Black sororities and fraternities, they always make that statement that while we are historically a Black organization, we are for everyone. When you look at historical Black colleges and universities, they say we are historically Black, but we are for everyone. We're educating everyone. When you look at the NAACP, it's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, but it's also seeking to create change within society as a whole. So all of these Black systems of justice and economic parity and all of these things are not just for the Black community, it is for everyone. And I always think, and I think it's one of the things that gives me hope, but also gives me that sense of sadness when looking at the country as a whole, is you have this group of people that have been oppressed and looked down upon for all these hundreds of years, who have always fundamentally held that idea that what we do within this community is benefiting everyone. And I just imagine, what would it be like if this entire country could take on that mindset, to understand that what we do to benefit one group should be able to benefit everyone. And if it doesn't, then it's not a system for the people.
Absolutely. And has anyone ever thought when we're having these colors about different ethnicities, why we call it a race?
Hmm.
What a race? Because when I think about a race, I mean, what is a race? Somebody help me out.
You're trying to beat somebody else.
Yeah.
So it's all in the language. It's all in the makeup of this system, and so we're here to educate, enlighten, and inform. And I mean, this check that Dr. King was talking about, what, 56 years ago now today. Um, it's time for America to put put your money where your mouth is. And we're hearing all the buzzwords now. It's a wonderful thing. We get excited when someone says diversity and inclusion and equity, and everybody's just like, yes, yes, yes. But let's put some action behind it. And
Mhm.
this is where the accomplices come in. So, I mean, people are making comments about organizations that claim to be on the right side but are not. So put some action behind that.
I think there's also the need for that call to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think
Absolutely.
that's so often what keeps people from doing the right things, because there's something about it that makes them uncomfortable, or they feel like they are losing something or risking something that they're not willing to give up. And again, I just wonder what our society would be like if we stopped caving into that idea that I'm willing to give as long as it's comfortable. I'm willing to sacrifice as long as it's comfortable. I'm willing for you to have the same that I have, or to be equal, as long as I can still be comfortable. And what does it look like? And how does it change and shift our society if we recognize that my discomfort might be in having to sacrifice something that I don't have by right, but that is keeping somebody else away from economic justice, racial justice, social justice, all of these things. Yeah, it's a
That's,
losing race
that's
when we
that
keep,
race. That
yeah.
is that race. And so, but and how ignorant is that? So
Mhm.
all of this is based on the color of someone's skin?
Well, that's how you justify the exploitation. Again, it's all connected with economic exploitation. I tell my students all the time that, like Europeans aren't genetically programmed to hate black skin, because there was a time when they worshiped black Madonnas and, Jesus, right? And there's actually black saints. The patron saint of Germany is black,
Yep. Yep.
Saint Maurice. And if you look at
Yep.
pictures, I mean, he's not brown. You look at the
No,
images, he
he
is
is
black.
black. He is black.
Right? So this
I, I
is
saw
where,
I saw my first black Madonnas in all throughout Europe, in Germany, in France, in Switzerland, in Italy. So how did we get here? And the fact that you would keep me from having a position of leadership, or have just getting a job, just getting my foot in the door, period, because of the color of my skin, because of my race, because some other ethnicity wanted to be superior. And so now here we are trying to trying to run, and we're wearing ourselves out, trying to keep up, trying to be equal. And at some point, these accomplices that I'm asking for have got to say, okay, race over, and everyone has a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. And that is why we do this Lived Black Experience project, and why we have these deep and difficult discussions. Brother Baba, any closing words for us tonight?
I think I want to go back to that whole thing of love. And yes, King says you can love someone, but you don't have to like them. So that's one strategy, right? For me, I prefer the whole idea of seeing the image of God in every human being. Now, I know that sounds very kumbaya. Can we all just hold hands and sing? It's really visioning those images of God in other human beings when they're being difficult. That's the test, is when you really have to do the work. Because it's easy when you're having a great time with folks, right? To say, oh yeah, they're all in the image of God. But when you're having a rough time, when you're in the struggle, that's the time when that needs to kick in. Yeah. So keep the love, make it real.
That's it. Make it real. Can we agree is unconditional?
Yeah, I mean, if you're dealing with the image of God, yeah, it's definitely unconditional, right?
Yeah. What say you, baby queen?
I think my last or closing thought would just be, it's a quote from Coretta Scott King that I've been thinking about a lot today. And it's, the greatness of a community is most accurately measured by the compassionate actions of its members, a heart of grace, and a soul generated by love.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, love sees, and I mentioned it earlier. I think so. What, Baba? This is our third King Day celebration program. It's been all about Dr. King today and his work. I think I'd just like to remind us of 1 Corinthians. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but instead rejoices in and with the truth. It always protects. Love always trusts, always endures, always perseveres. And with that being said, we say thank you to our LBE community, our friends, our supporters. We will see you back in 2 weeks when we will talk about Mrs. Coretta Scott King and her work in support of her husband, Dr. King. Until then, go in grace.